Ancient humans had a punishment so brutal that people sometimes begged for death instead. It didn't involve a weapon. It didn't leave a mark on the body. It was just being made to leave. Banishment, exile, getting cast out of your own group, and for most of human history, that wasn't just inconvenient. It was one of the worst things that could happen to a person. Step into a hunter-gatherer band tens of thousands of years ago. 20, 30, maybe 50 people depending on the season. These weren't just your neighbors, they were your only neighbors, your only doctors, your only backup hunters, your only emotional support system in a world with no phones, no mail, no way to reach anyone outside arm's reach. If something went wrong inside that small circle, there wasn't another circle waiting nearby to take you in. Not easily anyway. So when someone broke a serious rule, the group had a real problem on its hands. Punishing them was necessary, but punishing them too harshly could be its own kind of disaster, because losing a person from a group that small meant losing a hunter, a gatherer, a parent, a pair of hands the whole camp depended on. Anthropologists who study how small-scale societies handle conflict have noticed something fascinating about how this actually played out. When someone committed an offense serious enough to provoke real anger, sometimes the social pressure became so intense that the person themselves chose to leave the camp, not forced out at spear point. They left because the shame and tension had become unbearable to sit inside. And then something strange happened. Once that person was actually gone, alone, facing the real possibility of permanent exile, the mood back in camp started to shift. The anger that had felt so justified a few days earlier began to soften. People started remembering who this person was before the incident. A brother, a skilled tracker, someone's favorite storyteller around the fire. The fury cooled into something closer to worry, then guilt, then plain sadness. So eventually, someone would go looking for them. They'd find the exiled person sitting alone, almost certainly bracing for the loneliest stretch of their life. And instead of more punishment, they'd get conversation, an arm around the shoulder, a quiet invitation to come back. This wasn't softness. It was strategy, even if nobody called it that out loud. The group needed every set of hands it had. But more than that, the threat of permanent isolation had already done the real work. The fear of being alone, genuinely and completely alone, was often punishment enough on its own. Nobody needed to add anything else on top of it. This pattern shows up again and again across very different human societies, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles. In ancient Greece, a different version of this fear shows up in formal law. The practice of ostracism let citizens vote to banish someone from the city for up to 10 years. No formal crime required, just enough public suspicion or resentment built up against them. It wasn't physically violent. There was no execution, no torture. But the ancient sources treat it as a devastating blow regardless, a complete severing from your home, your status, and everyone who knew your name. In ancient Rome, voluntary exile was sometimes used as an escape hatch, a way to leave before facing trial and possibly something worse. The Roman poet Ovid, exiled to a distant outpost on the Black Sea coast by the emperor, wrote about the experience in deeply personal terms, describing it as something close to a kind of living death, cut off from the city and the people who mattered most to him. The physical hardship of exile was real, but the writings that survive from this era focus, just as much, if not more, on the unbearable weight of disconnection itself. What's striking is how consistently ancient cultures treated isolation as something closer to a wound than an inconvenience. Today we might call it loneliness and treat it as an unpleasant feeling to push through. Ancient societies built entire systems of punishment, reconciliation, and law around the understanding that being cut off from other people wasn't just uncomfortable. It could be experienced as worse than physical pain, worse even than death itself for some. So if isolation was treated as such a severe threat, what did ancient humans do to avoid ever ending up there in the first place, even without breaking any rules? The answer is that they built loneliness-proofing directly into the structure of daily life, long before anyone had a word for mental health. Take the San people of southern Africa, whose H0 gift exchange networks have been studied extensively by anthropologists. Within these networks, people gave gifts not as one-time transactions, but as the beginning of an ongoing relationship. A gift created an obligation to eventually give something back, which created another obligation, which created another. The result was a web of connection stretching far beyond someone's own camp, linking them to people in completely different bands, sometimes located days of walking away. This wasn't charity, it was insurance. If your own camp's hunting failed for a season or sickness swept through, those distant relationships meant somewhere else to turn. But the side effect was just as important. Nobody in that network was ever truly cut off from human connection, even if their own immediate group was small, struggling, or going through a rough patch. Many hunter-gatherer societies extended this even further through something researchers call fictive kinship. Being treated as family didn't always require being related by blood. Calling someone brother or aunt in the right context could create real, binding social obligations, the same expectations of support and loyalty you'd extend to actual relatives. This meant a person's safety net wasn't limited by genetics. It could be built, expanded, and reinforced through relationships chosen and maintained over a lifetime. There's even physical evidence of just how far these networks of connection could stretch. Archaeologists studying tools from the Upper Paleolithic period in Western Europe found a stone artifact discovered hundreds of kilometers from where its raw material originally came from, evidence of trade and contact between groups separated by enormous distances, long before anyone could have written down an address or sent a letter. These weren't just resource exchanges. Researchers studying these patterns suggest that the objects themselves likely functioned as symbols, deliberately exchanged to maintain relationships across distances that would otherwise have made connection nearly impossible. Step back and look at all of this together, and a clear picture emerges. Ancient humans weren't simply more socially connected by accident or by lucky circumstance. They built systems, deliberately and repeatedly, specifically designed to make sure nobody fell through the cracks into total isolation. Gift networks that created standing obligations to maintain contact. Kinship systems flexible enough to expand a person's safety net well past their own family line. Objects traded across staggering distances, partly just to keep relationships alive between people who might otherwise never see each other again. And running underneath nearly all of it was the same core understanding, repeated across wildly different times and places. Being cut off from other humans wasn't treated as a small inconvenience to push through alone. It was treated as one of the heaviest burdens a person could carry, serious enough to shape laws, serious enough to shape entire economic systems built around gift-giving, serious enough that an entire community would go out looking for someone, just to bring them back from the edge of being alone. So the next time loneliness creeps in, there's something worth remembering. Humans have never actually been built to handle prolonged isolation well, and our ancestors knew it long before anyone had the science to explain why. They didn't have therapy. They didn't have phones. What they had was each other and an entire set of social tools built, generation after generation, around one simple, unspoken rule. Nobody gets left out there alone for long if the group can possibly help it.